The wind began its warning long before the snow ever fell. It came low and restless across the hills, pressing against the rock face like a hand searching for a crack. Folks in the valley had learned to listen when the wind sounded like that. It meant winter was not just passing through. It meant winter intended to stay. She had heard it too. The cave sat halfway up the ridge, carved by time and water long before any fence post or wagon track marked the land. Most people thought it was nothing more than a shallow hollow in the stone. They were wrong. She had spent years learning every inch of that wall, every shift in shadow, every loose stone that could be moved if you knew where to press. Out there, on the open stretch of American frontier, survival was never loud or grand. It was quiet work, it was steady hands and patient thought. It was knowing that storms did not care how brave you were. She had built her hidden shelter within the cave wall the same way she did everything else in life. One stone at a time. The winter before had nearly taken her. The memory still lived in her bones. Snow had fallen without mercy for 3 days straight, sealing the valley road and turning the hills into white walls. She had been caught outside longer than she meant to be. By the time she reached the cave, her fingers were stiff and her breath came in thin clouds. There had been no true refuge then, only the shallow curve of stone and a pile of firewood that the wind kept stealing heat from. She promised herself she would not be caught unprepared again. All spring and summer she worked in silence. While others tended fields or traded stories in town, she studied rock and shadow. The cave wall on the north side had a weakness, not visible to a passing eye. A narrow seam ran through the stone, hidden beneath old mineral stains. If you traced it with your fingers, you could feel the slight difference in texture. She traced it many times. At first, she used only her hands and a small iron tool she kept from earlier days. She loosened stones carefully, never removing too much at once. The outer face had to look untouched. That was the trick. A hidden shelter only stays hidden if it appears to be nothing at all. Behind that wall she carved a hollow just large enough to crouch inside. She lined it with flat rock and packed earth to keep out drafts. She stored dry wood in the far corner and tucked away a wool blanket sealed in oilcloth. A small tin box held matches wrapped in waxed paper. She even placed a narrow vent near the top, no wider than her thumb, so smoke could slip out without drawing notice. By the time autumn painted the trees copper and gold, her shelter was finished. From the outside, the cave looked the same as it always had. A stranger could walk past it and never guess that behind one carved stone panel lay warmth, safety, and a second chance. Some might ask why she did not simply stay in town during winter. The answer was simple. The town had grown loud over the years. New faces, new rules, new men who looked at land and saw profit instead of home. She had learned long ago that peace often lived farther from the road. The cave had been her father's discovery. He found it while tracking deer along the ridge. Back then she was a child small enough to ride on his shoulders. He told her that stone remembers everything. It remembers rain, footsteps, and even sorrow. She did not understand that then. She does now. When he passed, the land felt different. The valley filled with strangers who spoke of progress and fences. She kept to herself and kept to the hills. The first snowflake of that season landed on her sleeve in early November. It melted almost instantly, leaving a dark star against the wool. She looked up at the sky and felt that same uneasy stirring in the wind. This winter would not be gentle. By mid-December, the storm arrived. It rolled over the mountains with a weight that bent tree branches and swallowed trails whole. Snow fell thick and steady, not in flakes but in sheets. The world shrank to a few feet of white and gray. Even sound changed. The usual creak of trees and distant call of birds vanished beneath the hush. She had gone to the cave that morning to check her stores. The sky had been heavy but quiet. She told herself she would be back home before dusk. She had misjudged the storm's speed. By the time she stepped outside, the path had already begun to disappear. Snow struck her face sideways. The wind pushed against her as if trying to drive her back into the rock. Going down the ridge would have been foolish. One wrong step, and she could slide into the ravine hidden beneath fresh snow. The cave was closer, the cave was certain. She turned back. Inside, the air was colder than she expected. The shallow front offered little protection from the gusts that forced their way inside. Snow swirled along the floor in thin spirals. Her woodpile sat near the entrance, but she knew from experience that lighting a fire there would waste half its warmth. This was the moment she had prepared for. Her gloved fingers found the carved stone panel. It blended perfectly with the rest of the wall, marked by a simple old pattern that looked decorative but served a purpose. She pressed at the lower edge, then shifted her weight slightly to the right. The stone moved inward just enough to allow her to grip it. Slowly she pulled. The hidden door opened without a sound. Behind it lay the narrow chamber she had shaped with months of quiet labor. She slipped inside and eased the stone back into place. The difference was immediate. The wind's howl dulled to a distant murmur. The air felt still, not warm yet, but steady. She knelt and reached for the dry kindling stored against the inner wall. The matches struck on the first try. Flame bloomed small and hopeful. The fire caught carefully, feeding on the wood she had protected from damp. Light flickered across the stone ceiling, revealing tool marks that only she would ever notice. Smoke found its way upward through the vent just as planned. For the first time that day she allowed herself a slow breath. Hours passed, the storm did not weaken. Snow piled against the cave entrance, sealing it further. Inside her hidden shelter she rationed wood and wrapped the blanket tightly around her shoulders. She listened to the rhythm of the wind and thought of winters long gone. But as night deepened, a new sound reached her ears. At first she thought it was only the storm shifting. A heavier gust perhaps, or snow sliding from the ridge above. She held still, waiting for it to pass. It came again. A faint scraping, not outside the cave, but against the outer wall itself, slow and uneven, not wind, not falling snow. Her heart began to pound in a way it had not in years. No one knew about the hidden shelter. No one had seen her carve the wall. She had taken care to work alone and at odd hours. Even if someone sought refuge in the cave, they would see nothing but bare stone. The scraping continued. Then a dull thud as if something had leaned hard against the outer face. She moved closer to the stone door, careful not to disturb the fire. Through the narrow seam where the panel met rock, she could see nothing but darkness. Yet the sound was real. Something was there, another thud. Snow sifted down from the cave ceiling outside. She imagined the entrance buried now, nearly sealed. Whatever stood beyond that wall had chosen the worst night possible to wander these hills. Her first thought was of a lost traveler. The ridge had claimed more than one careless soul over the years. If someone was out there in this snowstorm, they would not last long without shelter. But the sound did not call out. No voice asked for help. No human footsteps paced in panic. Instead, the scraping grew more deliberate. It traced along the exact seam where her hidden panel rested. She felt the blood drain from her face. No one could know. No one should even notice that line in the rock. And yet whatever was outside seemed to sense it, pressing and shifting as though searching for weakness. The fire crackled behind her, a small, brave light in the tight chamber. She tightened her grip on the iron tool she had used to carve the wall months ago. It felt heavier now. The wind howled again, louder than before, shaking the cave mouth. Snow fell in thick waves. The storm was not done with the valley. It might rage until morning or longer. And beyond that stone door, something continued to test the wall. She stood there in the narrow hidden shelter she had built with her own hands, listening as the unseen presence pressed closer. Then, without warning, the carved panel shifted inward just a fraction of an inch. Cold air slipped through the seam and brushed her cheek like a warning. She froze, every muscle tight, her hand gripping the iron tool so hard her knuckles ached. The fire behind her popped softly, unaware of the danger pressing at the other side of the wall. Another shove came, stronger this time. The stone trembled but held. Whoever or whatever was outside had found the weak line in the rock. Her mind raced through every possibility. A traveler lost in the snowstorm might lean against the wall searching for shelter. A ranch hand from the valley could have wandered up the ridge by mistake. But no one climbed this far in weather like this without a reason. The ridge in winter was a place people avoided. The pushing stopped. For a long moment there was only the sound of the wind roaring past the cave entrance. Snow scraped along stone like dry sand. She did not breathe. She did not move. Then she heard it, a low, strained sound. Not a voice calling for help, not words she could understand. More like a groan pulled from deep in the chest, human, the iron tool lowered slightly in her hand. She had lived alone long enough to know that fear can make the mind twist shadows into monsters. The valley folk sometimes spoke of strange things on the hills during heavy storms, but she trusted what she could see and hear. And that sound was not the wind. It came again, closer to the ground this time, followed by the scrape of boots dragging over stone. Someone had collapsed against the wall. Her first instinct was caution. The hidden shelter had taken months to carve. It was her safety against storms and against the growing reach of men who believed land belonged to whoever claimed it loudest. If she opened that panel, even a little, her secret would no longer belong only to her. But if she did nothing and a man froze outside her wall, she would hear that silence for the rest of her days. She leaned closer to the seam and pressed her eye to the narrow gap. Through the thin sliver she could see part of the cave's open floor. Snow swirled in from the entrance, piling near the mouth. Against the wall, half hidden in shadow, lay a shape. A broad shoulder, a coat crusted white. One arm bent awkwardly beneath him. He was not moving now. The storm had nearly buried the entrance. If he had tried to climb down the ridge after this, he would not have made it 5 steps. He must have stumbled upon the cave by chance. She closed her eyes for a moment, weighing the risk. Her father had once told her that survival meant knowing when to stand alone and when to open the door. She did not always agree with him, but she had never forgotten those words. Carefully, she shifted the stone panel inward just enough to create a narrow opening. The cold rushed in hard and fast, biting at the firelight behind her. She slipped out, easing the panel back into place until it looked untouched again. The cave felt twice as cold as before. She crossed the short distance to the fallen man and knelt beside him. Snow had gathered along his back and in the folds of his coat. His hat lay several feet away, half buried. His face was pale beneath a rough beard, ice clinging to the edges. She pressed her gloved hand near his mouth. A faint breath warmed her fingertips. Relief came quickly, but it was followed by worry. He was alive, but not for long if left there. His boots were heavy with snow, and one leg looked twisted in a way that spoke of a fall. She did not have the strength to carry a full-grown man easily, especially in this cold, yet she had no other choice. She grabbed him beneath the arms and pulled. His body dragged across the stone floor, leaving a dark streak where snow melted under him. Every movement cost her breath. The wind tried to push them both back toward the entrance. When she reached the hidden panel, she worked quickly, pressing at the lower edge until it shifted inward. The opening was narrow, barely enough for one person at a time. She dragged him feet first into the chamber. It was a tight fit. His shoulders brushed the sides of the stone. For a moment she feared they would both become trapped halfway through, but with one final pull he slid fully inside. She sealed the panel behind them. The small space felt even smaller now. The firelight flickered over his still face, revealing lines carved by hard years and weather. He did not look like a drifter. His coat, though worn, was sturdy. A leather satchel hung across his chest, secured tightly even in his fall. She set to work without thinking. She stripped the wet outer coat from his body and hung it near the fire. She pulled off his boots, water dripping from the seams. His socks were soaked through. She replaced them with a dry pair she kept for emergencies, rolling them carefully over stiff toes. He did not wake. Up close, she could see a bruise forming along his temple. Likely he had slipped on the ridge path and struck the rock before sliding down toward the cave. That path had claimed many sure-footed men in fair weather. In a snowstorm it was a trap. She wrapped her spare blanket around his shoulders and fed another piece of wood to the fire. The small vent carried smoke upward as designed, and the warmth began to gather in the tight chamber. Still he did not stir. She studied his satchel. It was made of thick leather, well cared for. The strap bore the faint stamp of a trading post from 2 towns over. That alone made her uneasy. She had not been to that town in years, but she knew what kind of men gathered there now. Land buyers, surveyors, railroad agents. Men who looked at hills and saw lines on a map. Her gaze shifted back to his face. He looked older than she first thought. Not old, but seasoned. The kind of man who had walked many miles and listened to many arguments. Why had he been climbing her ridge in a storm like this? The question settled heavy in her chest. Outside, the storm raged harder. Snow thudded against the outer cave wall. The hidden shelter, built as protection from nature, now held a stranger whose purpose she did not know. Hours passed. She checked his breathing often, brushing her fingers near his lips. At one point he murmured something under his breath, a single word she could not catch. His eyelids fluttered but did not open. She kept the fire small and steady. Wood was precious. The hidden chamber was designed to hold heat, not waste it. The stone walls slowly absorbed warmth and returned it in quiet waves. As she watched him, old memories rose uninvited. Years ago, when the valley was smaller and quieter, strangers came less often. Those who did usually passed through quickly. But then rumors of iron tracks spreading west began to drift in with traders. The railroad would carve its way through mountains and plains alike. Towns would grow. Land would be claimed and sold and fenced. She had seen what happened to neighbors who held land without papers. Men with documents arrived and said the ground had already been promised. Arguments followed. Fences rose where cattle once grazed freely. She chose the hills partly to avoid that. The cave had been her father's refuge during harsh winters when hunting was scarce. After he was gone, she made it her own. The hidden shelter within the cave wall was not just protection from snowstorms. It was protection from being seen. She did not trust easily. The man shifted suddenly, drawing her back to the present. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused and glassy. He tried to sit up, but pain stopped him. A low groan escaped his lips. "Easy," she said quietly, her voice firm but calm. "You took a fall." His gaze moved around the narrow chamber, confusion deepening. He reached instinctively for his satchel. "It's here," she told him. "You're safe for now." The words surprised her as she spoke them. Safe. The storm was still raging. The ridge was buried. And she had invited a stranger into the one place she kept hidden from the world. He swallowed hard as if trying to gather strength. "The cave," he muttered, his voice rough. "I saw light." Her stomach tightened. She had been careful. The fire in the hidden chamber should not have been visible from outside. But earlier, before she sealed herself in, the outer cave had been open. Perhaps the glow had flickered through just long enough for him to notice. "You're mistaken," she said softly. There was no light outside. His eyes searched her face as if measuring truth from tone. For a moment she thought he might press the matter. Instead, exhaustion claimed him again. His eyelids drooped, and he sank back against the stone, but his hand remained on the satchel. That small detail did not escape her. Whatever had brought him up the ridge mattered enough that he would not let it out of reach, even half-frozen and injured. She wondered what lay inside. Papers, maps, deeds. The thought of maps made her pulse quicken. If he carried survey lines for this valley, then the quiet life she carved into the hills might already be marked for change. If he survived the storm, he would eventually climb down and speak of what he found. And what would he say about the cave? The fire crackled again, sending shadows dancing along the stone walls. Outside, the storm showed no sign of easing. Snow continued to pile high against the entrance. The hidden shelter, once her private shield against winter, now felt like the center of something larger. She looked at the carved panel that separated them from the outer cave. It had held strong against wind and wandering eyes, but it had not kept fate from knocking. The man stirred once more, his fingers tightening around the satchel strap. And though the storm raged outside and the night pressed heavy against the ridge, she could not shake the feeling that the real trouble had only just found its way to her door. By morning, the storm had not eased. If anything, it had settled in deeper, like it meant to bury the whole ridge under its weight. The cave entrance was likely sealed now, packed tight with snowdrifts. Inside the hidden shelter, the air felt warmer but heavier, filled with the quiet strain of two people sharing a space meant for one. He woke fully just after dawn, though dawn was only guessed at by the dim shift in light through the narrow vent. His eyes opened slower this time, clearer, and he did not look confused. He looked alert. She was already watching him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The fire had burned low, only a small bed of coals glowing between them. His gaze moved across the stone walls, the stacked wood, the careful seams of the carved panel. He was studying, not just seeing. "You built this," he said at last, voice still rough but steadier than before. It was not a question. She did not answer right away. Instead, she handed him a small tin cup of warmed water. He accepted it, though his hand trembled. "Drink slow," she said. "Your body's been through enough." He obeyed, but his eyes did not leave her face. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. The words hung in the air. Gratitude was simple enough, but gratitude did not explain why he had been climbing her ridge in a snowstorm with a satchel that never left his side. "What were you doing up there?" she asked, keeping her tone even. He hesitated. That small pause told her more than any quick answer could. "I lost the trail," he said finally. "Storm came faster than I expected. That trail doesn't lead anywhere unless you know where you're going." His jaw tightened slightly. A flicker of something passed across his face. Not anger, more like calculation. "I was headed north," he replied. "There's talk of land beyond the valley, untouched land, untouched." The word scraped at her. "There's no untouched land," she said. "Just land folks haven't bothered to understand." He gave a faint, tired smile at that. "Maybe that's what I meant." She leaned back against the stone wall, studying him openly now. His leg was propped straight in front of him. When he shifted, pain crossed his face. It would be days before he could climb down the ridge safely, even if the snow stopped. Days. That meant time. Time for questions, time for truths to surface. "You're not just wandering," she said. "That satchel says otherwise." His hand instinctively pressed against it again. He glanced down at the leather flap as if weighing whether to open it or guard it harder. "You don't trust easy," he observed. "Trust keeps you alive when you live alone." The wind roared outside, rattling faintly through the vent. Snow thudded against the cave's outer wall. The storm had them both held in place, forced into this tight shelter where silence could not stretch far. He took another sip of water, then set the cup aside. "I work with land records," he said slowly. "Survey lines, claims, boundaries. Folks in town want clear titles. Clear maps." There it was. The very thing she had feared. "Clear for who?" she asked. "For buyers, for families moving west. For investors who think rail will come through sooner than folks expect." Investors, rail, words that had already changed the valley once before. "And what happens to the people already here?" she asked, her voice steady but low. "When your clear maps don't match their memory of the land?" He did not answer right away. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what papers they hold." She let out a quiet breath that held no humor. "Paper burns," she said. "Stone doesn't." His eyes flicked toward the carved wall behind her. The hidden shelter, the months of work she had put into shaping it. A refuge carved into something older than any deed. "You built this to stay unseen," he said. "I built it to survive winter. That's not the same thing." She felt the weight of his observation settle between them. He was sharper than she first thought. Not just a man carrying maps, but one who understood why someone might hide from them. Outside, the storm shifted again, wind striking the cave mouth at a different angle. Snow slid somewhere above, sending a dull rumble through the rock. He winced as he adjusted his leg. "You won't be walking that ridge any time soon," she said. "I figured as much. And if the storm keeps on like this, town won't see you for days." He nodded, absorbing the truth of it. Silence stretched again, but it felt different now. Not just caution, but something closer to negotiation without words. They were bound by circumstance. She had saved him from the snowstorm. He carried knowledge that could reshape her quiet hills. After a while, he spoke again. "There are rumors," he said. "About this ridge." She felt her shoulders stiffen. "Rumors of what?" "Old claims that were never settled. Land that was marked once, then lost in a courthouse fire years back. Some believe there's value here, timber, maybe minerals. Hard to say without proper survey," her father's voice echoed in her memory. Speaking of men who came with measuring chains and stakes, marking earth that had fed families long before them. "And you came to find proof," she said. "I came to verify boundaries. That's just another word for the same thing," he did not argue. Instead, he reached slowly for his satchel and opened it just enough for her to see inside rolled maps. Official stamps, inked lines cutting through valleys and ridges alike. Her ridge. One of the maps showed a faint outline that matched the curve of the hills she knew by heart. A dotted line ran close to the cave's position. "Is that where you were headed?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. He followed her gaze. "Yes. And what happens if you confirm what's drawn there? Then it becomes easier for the town council to move forward." "Forward for them," she said. "Not for me." He closed the satchel carefully. "You live alone up here," he said. "No registered claim, no filed deed. If someone with deeper pockets decides to push, it won't matter how long you've been here." She knew that already. It was the quiet truth behind every winter she endured on her own. The hidden shelter within the cave wall was not only for snowstorms. It was for the kind of storm that came with paperwork and strangers. "And what will you tell them?" she asked. "When you get back," he looked at the fire instead of her. "That depends on what I find." "You already found it." He met her eyes again. "I found a cave," he said. "And a woman who saved my life." The way he said it left room for choice. The storm outside seemed to pause for a breath, then slammed harder against the ridge, as if reminding them that nature cared little for human bargains. She stood and added another small log to the fire. Wood was dwindling. If the snowstorm lasted longer than expected, rationing would become harder. Sharing heat with him meant sharing risk. "Why climb in that weather?" she asked suddenly. "You could have waited in town." He hesitated again, but this time the pause felt heavier. "Because I heard something," he admitted. "What?" "A story. About a woman on the ridge who never signed away her land. A woman who knew the hills better than any map." Her pulse quickened. "And you believe that story?" "I believe there might be truth in it." "And you came to see if I'd fight?" He did not deny it. "I came to see if there was a claim strong enough to stand against what's coming." "What's coming?" The words echoed louder than the storm. Rail lines did not bend easily. Investors did not turn back because one person preferred quiet. The valley would change, with or without her blessing. "And if I won't leave," she said. He leaned back against the stone, pain flickering across his face again. "Then someone will have to decide what matters more," he said softly. "Progress or memory?" She felt anger rise, but beneath it was something else. Fear, yes, but also the weight of history pressing close. Her father had once said that storms test more than shelter. They test conviction. The cave trembled faintly as another shift of snow slid from above. The hidden shelter held firm, just as she designed it. But beyond these walls, forces were gathering that stone alone could not stop. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion creeping back in. "If I don't return soon," he murmured, "others may come looking." The words settled like frost. "How many know you came here?" she asked. "Enough." Outside, the wind howled across the ridge, carrying with it the promise that this snowstorm was only the beginning. "Enough." The words stayed between them long after he said it. She turned back to the fire, but her mind was no longer on the storm or the woodpile. If others knew he had come up the ridge, then this snowstorm was only buying her time. The hidden shelter within the cave wall had protected her from winter. It might not protect her from men carrying papers and questions. "How long before they start looking?" she asked. "If the storm clears by tomorrow, maybe a day after that," he said. "If it keeps on, they'll wait. No one climbs this ridge blind." She nodded. That was true. The path was narrow even in summer. In winter it was a gamble. Still, the idea of strangers searching these hills tightened her chest. He shifted again, trying to sit straighter. Pain flashed across his face, but he pushed through it. "You should think about what you want to do," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about that for years," she replied. Outside, the wind howled low and steady. The snowstorm showed no sign of weakening. The cave entrance was likely sealed by now. In a strange way, the storm was her ally. It kept the world out. But storms never lasted forever. By late afternoon, his fever had begun to rise. She noticed the change in his breathing first, shallow, uneven. His skin felt warmer than it should, even in the close heat of the hidden chamber. "You hit your head hard," she said, pressing a cool cloth against his temple. "You need rest?" He gave a faint nod, though his eyes looked distant. She had not planned for tending an injured man in her secret refuge. The hidden shelter was stocked for survival, not nursing. She had dried herbs for cough and ache, spare bandages, and enough food for herself through a long snowstorm. Now she would have to stretch everything. As she worked, she found herself studying him differently, not just as a threat, but as a person. His hands were calloused in ways that did not match a desk job. There were faint scars along his knuckles, old and healed. He had worked outdoors before carrying maps. "You're not just a surveyor," she said quietly. He opened his eyes halfway. "I grew up on land that wasn't ours on paper," he murmured. "We were asked to leave when I was 12. The words surprised her. "My father signed something he couldn't read well," he continued. "We lost everything. I learned then that paper matters whether we like it or not." She held still, cloth in hand. "So you joined them," she said. "I joined the only side that seemed to understand how the game was played." His honesty unsettled her more than any smooth excuse would have. "Do you believe in what they're doing?" she asked. He stared at the stone ceiling of the hidden shelter. "I believe towns grow whether we want them to or not. I believe railroads don't ask permission from hills. But I also believe people shouldn't be pushed aside without being heard." "And are they heard?" she asked. "Not often." The fire snapped softly between them. Evening crept in without color. The vent showed only dim gray. Snow still fell. The storm had become a steady force rather than a wild one, as if it had settled into a rhythm. She stepped out into the outer cave once more to check the entrance. It took effort to push the carved panel open. Snow had piled high against the mouth, pressing inward. Only a small gap near the top let in faint light. The world beyond was white and silent. She stepped back into the hidden shelter and sealed the panel again. Her refuge was holding. For now, when she turned, he was watching her with sharper eyes. "They'll come," he said. "Even if they have to wait for the snow to melt." "I know. And when they do, they won't just ask questions. They'll bring documents, claims, pressure. I know that too." The tension in the small chamber felt thicker than the smoke drifting toward the vent. "You could come down before they arrive," he said carefully. "Speak first. Tell your side. File something." "With what money?" she asked. "With what proof?" My father's word carved into rock. He did not answer. Instead, he reached for his satchel again. This time he pulled out one of the rolled maps and unfastened it slowly. He spread it across the stone floor between them. The lines were neat and deliberate. The valley divided into parcels, the ridge marked with faint dotted boundaries. He pointed to a section near the cave's position. "This part," he said, "is listed as unverified, no formal survey completed." "That's why I came." She crouched closer, studying the paper. The ridge she knew by heart reduced to ink. "If I don't confirm it," he continued, "it stays uncertain." "Uncertain land is harder to sell." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you choose not to confirm?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because sometimes uncertainty buys time." The idea settled heavy in her mind. "You'd risk your position for that?" she asked. He gave a faint, tired smile. "My position isn't as secure as you think. Investors care about results. If I come back with a broken leg and no clear survey, they may blame the storm." The wind outside gave a long, hollow moan through the cave mouth. "You could also tell them you found someone living here," she said. "I could." The unspoken weight of that choice filled the shelter. Before she could reply, a new sound cut through the storm, distant, faint, but unmistakable. A sharp crack, like wood snapping under pressure. They both froze. It came again, louder this time. Not from the cave entrance, from higher up the ridge. Snow shifting. Her breath caught. Heavy snowfall followed by a sudden drop in wind could loosen packed drifts. The ridge above the cave was steep. "Stay here," she said quickly. She moved to the carved panel and pressed it open, stepping into the outer cave. The air felt colder than before. The wind had lessened slightly, but the snow above looked unstable. Another crack echoed, followed by a low rumble that seemed to roll beneath her feet. Her heart pounded. If a large section of snow broke loose, it could slam into the cave mouth with crushing force. The entrance was already packed tight. A heavy slide could seal it completely. Or worse, She stepped back inside the hidden shelter just as the rumble grew louder. The ground trembled. A deep roar filled the air, growing fast. Snow and ice cascading down the ridge. She threw herself toward the carved panel and pulled it shut, bracing her back against it. The impact came seconds later. A thunderous crash shook the cave. Snow slammed against the outer wall with such force that dust and small stones rained from the ceiling. The hidden shelter groaned but held. He gritted his teeth, trying to sit upright despite his injury. "Is it collapsing?" he asked. "I don't think so," she said, though her voice trembled. The roar continued for what felt like forever, then slowly faded into silence. When the shaking stopped, they both remained still, listening. Nothing but the distant whisper of falling snow. She waited several long minutes before easing away from the panel. Carefully, she opened it a crack and stepped into the outer cave again. The entrance was gone. Where the mouth of the cave had been, there was now a solid wall of packed snow and debris. The avalanche had buried it completely. Her pulse thudded in her ears. They were sealed in. The hidden shelter had saved them from the snowstorm and from the avalanche's force. But now the cave was entombed. She stepped back into the chamber and closed the panel, her face pale. "It's blocked," she said quietly. "How bad?" "Completely." Silence filled the small space. The fire burned low. Their wood supply was limited. Air still moved through the vent, but if snow covered that too, the shelter could turn into a trap. "We'll dig out," he said, though his voice lacked strength. "With what?" she replied. "And how long will that take?" He looked at the stacked wood, at the stone walls she had carved by hand over months. "You built this to survive a snowstorm," he said slowly. "Did you build it to survive being buried?" She had never planned for that. The hidden shelter within the cave wall had been her answer to winter winds, to freezing nights, to solitude. She had not imagined the mountain itself would try to seal her inside. Yet the stone around them felt steady, solid, the vent still pulled air. She knelt by the fire, feeding it one more careful piece of wood. "We ration," she said. "We wait. The storm will pass." "Snow melts. It always does." He studied her face in the firelight. "And if help comes before that?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Then we decide what story you tell." Outside, beneath tons of snow and silence, the ridge held its secrets tight. Inside the hidden shelter, warmth flickered against stone as the two of them faced a storm that had become more than weather. They decided nothing more that night. The avalanche had made the choice for them. The cave entrance was sealed by tons of snow, and the hidden shelter within the cave wall had become their only true refuge. The storm outside softened into a distant hush, but the weight of the mountain pressed in from every side. They worked in silence at first. She counted the remaining firewood, enough for several days if used carefully. The vent still pulled air, faint but steady. She checked it twice, brushing away fine snow that had drifted near the opening. The stone walls of the hidden chamber held firm, just as she had shaped them. What she built to survive a snowstorm was now holding against something greater. He insisted on helping, even with his injured leg. He shifted closer to the wall and began sorting smaller pieces of wood, setting aside the thicker logs for the coldest hours. His movements were slower, but steadier than before. The fever had eased. "Snow like this does not last forever," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "But it teaches you patience." They settled into a rhythm, short bursts of tending the fire, long stretches of stillness to conserve warmth. They spoke when necessary and sometimes when the quiet grew too heavy. On the second day of being buried, the storm finally cleared. They knew because the vent began to carry brighter light and fresher air. The wind had died. The world above them was still. He leaned back against the stone, listening. "If the ridge is calm, the snow will settle," he said. "In a day or two, the weight may ease at the entrance, or it may freeze solid," she answered. "Then we dig." She studied him. When he first fell against her cave wall, she saw him only as a threat, a man carrying maps and survey lines. Now she saw something else. A man who had once lost land because no one explained the paper he signed. A man who understood both sides of progress and memory. "You said others might come looking," she said. "If they do, they will find only snow. For now, and if we stay buried long enough, they might turn back." He shook his head slightly. Investors do not turn back. They wait, they plan, they send someone else. She looked at the carved stone panel, at the careful seam that had hidden her shelter for so long. The cave had always been her secret, a hidden shelter built to withstand winter. But secrets have a way of drawing attention when men start searching for something. On the third morning, they heard it. A distant thud, not snow shifting? Something sharper, repeated. He lifted his head. That is not the mountain. They listened again. Thud, pause, thud, tools striking packed snow. Her heart pounded. You were right, he nodded. They must have waited for the storm to pass. The sound grew clearer over the next hour. Voices drifted faintly through layers of snow and stone. Not close enough to make out words, but enough to confirm what she feared. They are digging toward the cave entrance, he said. She felt a rush of conflicting emotion. Relief that they would not suffocate in a buried cave. Fear that once the snow was cleared, her hidden shelter would no longer be just hers. They will expect to find you, she said. They will, and if they see me, he met her gaze steadily. Then we choose what happens next. The digging continued. Snow scraped away in heavy shovels. At one point, a shaft of brighter light pierced through a thin crack near the cave mouth. The avalanche barrier was weakening. She moved toward the carved panel but did not open it. The hidden shelter was still her last defense. She could remain concealed if she chose. Let them find him alone. Let him decide what to say. He seemed to read her thoughts. If you stay hidden, he said, they will assume I took shelter alone. They will clear the entrance and carry me down. They will come back later to finish what I started. And if I step out? She asked. Then the story changes. The thudding grew louder. Snow chunks began to slide inward, scattering across the outer cave floor. Voices called out, closer now. Anyone inside? He drew a slow breath. You saved my life. I will not repay that by pushing you aside. She searched his face for hesitation and found none. Those maps, she said. What if they remain uncertain? They can. And if you report that the ridge is unstable, that the snowstorm and avalanche make it dangerous for development. He gave a faint smile. That would not be untrue. The final barrier of snow broke inward with a rush of cold air and light. The cave mouth opened to the pale brightness of a winter sky. Figures stood beyond, bundled in heavy coats, faces flushed from work. There, one of them called. I see movement. She looked at him one last time inside the hidden shelter. Are you certain? She asked. He nodded. Land does not belong to paper alone. She opened the carved panel fully and stepped out into the outer cave. The men at the entrance froze. For a long moment no one spoke. Snow glittered around them. The ridge stood quiet beneath a clear sky. You are not alone, one of the men said slowly, looking from him to her. No, he replied, pushing himself upright with effort. I was not. They helped him toward the cave mouth, careful with his injured leg. One of them glanced at her again. You live here, he said. I survive here, she answered. There was something in her voice that made them hesitate. They did not see the hidden shelter within the cave wall. The carved panel blended seamlessly into stone. The avalanche had shifted snow and debris, masking any subtle lines. The secret held. As they prepared to carry him down the ridge, he turned back toward her. I will send word, he said. She nodded once. Days passed after they left. The snow melted slowly under weak winter sun. The cave entrance remained clear. She repaired small cracks in the outer wall caused by the avalanche. Inside the hidden shelter, she restocked wood and dried more herbs. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. Then, one afternoon, a rider appeared on the lower path. He walked with a cane now, but steadier. His leg was healing. He stopped several yards from the cave, not climbing all the way up. I filed my report, he called. She stepped into view at the cave mouth. The ridge is marked as unstable terrain. Survey postponed indefinitely. No clear boundaries confirmed. She studied his face for any sign of deception. The investors were not pleased, he continued. But without confirmed lines, they cannot move forward. And the town? Some were relieved. Not everyone wants rail cutting through their pasture. She felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for weeks. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "This," he said, holding it up, "is not a claim against you. It is a record of residence. It states that someone has been living on this ridge for years, that the land is in active use." She hesitated. "Paper burns," she reminded him. He smiled faintly. "So make a copy. Keep it in stone if you must." She walked down a few steps and accepted it. The ink was official. "Not a deed, but recognition." "I cannot promise what happens 10 years from now," he said, "or 20. The world changes, I know, but for now the ridge remains as it is." The wind moved gently across the hills, no longer carrying the threat of a snowstorm. The cave stood quiet behind her, the hidden shelter within the cave wall still intact. "You could come down sometime," he added. "Tell your own story." Not as someone hiding, but as someone choosing, she looked back at the ridge, at the stone that had held her through winter and avalanche. "I am not hiding," she said. "I am living," he nodded, accepting that. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "You once said uncertainty buys time." He paused. "Time can be enough," she said. He gave a small wave and made his way down the path, careful but confident. She returned to the cave and stepped inside. The carved panel waited where it always had. She pressed it gently, feeling the smooth seam beneath her fingers. The hidden shelter had saved her during the snowstorm. It had protected them both through avalanche and fear. But more than that, it had forced a choice. Stone remembers everything, her father used to say. It remembers storms, it remembers footsteps. It remembers when someone stands their ground without raising a fist. She sat beside the small fire and unfolded the paper once more. The words were simple, but they meant something. Recognition, a pause in the rush of progress. Outside, the ridge stretched wide and white beneath winter sun. No rail lines cut across it, no stakes marked it. The cave remained. The hidden shelter remained. And for now, so did she.